Hey everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where talk, it's knowledge. And today we've got with us the one and only Lesley Price. She's joining us from England. Hey Lesley, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Very good.
Lesley is with LearnAppeal, www.learnappeal.com. If you don't know what that is, go back about 3-4 shows where we talk all about it. It's a great project she's got. And we're also joined by Margie Meacham. She'll be with us in a moment. Here we go. And we are back, and oh, there she is in that center position of power. Yes, it's Margie. Hey, Margie, how are you?
Hey, I am great, Rick. It's great to be back on the program. One of my favorites. Hi, everybody.
Great. Now, Margie likes to do a lot of work in, or use a lot of what's in the field of neuroscience. We were talking about that a little bit pre-show, and today we're going to talk a little bit about neuroscience and the merger of neuroscience with artificial intelligence. So, and it's happening. It's happening as we speak. But Margie, so what have you been up to recently? Because I know you're always keeping up on the research and the tech. What's new in your world?
Well, gosh, there is so much. Well, one of the things is the fact that the field of neuroscience has merged with what's going on in artificial intelligence, because people trying to develop artificial intelligences are more and more discovering they have to study the human brain in order to do that effectively. And neuroscience researchers are learning that artificial intelligences can help them understand the brain. So we're actually seeing an awfully lot of crossover and scientists employing both of those areas or avenues of study to arrive at different ends. So it's a really exciting time to be a learning professional. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm developing a workshop on how to build a chatbot for learning. So it's an artificial intelligence that learns what an individual learner needs through conversations that you have with it, sort of like a learning coach, and gets better and better at delivering e-learning that is right for that person. So applications could be sales training or leadership training, where you might in the past have had a coach, but the beauty of a chatbot is it's available 24/7 whenever you need that support, as long as you can get it to work seamlessly and effectively so that the information you get is, quality information. We've all probably interacted with kind of clunky, very limited artificial intelligences that can't really answer very many questions. So the key is to really build it well, train it well, and give it lots of time to interact with people before you unleash it on a client or a learning audience. But very, very interesting things that you can do with those chatbots.
And they say there are some chatbots out there right now where people don't even know they're talking to a non-human. Right. They're that good.
Yeah, they are. As a matter of fact, I was chatting with my bank, and I happened to know it was a chatbot, but otherwise I wouldn't have been able to tell. So I asked it, are you a human being? And I love this response. It said, does it matter? And no, it doesn't. You're giving me the help I need, so thank you very much. And then we just kept going. So,
it's interesting.
One of the,
yes,
go ahead.
I've just been judging. I'm a judge on the Learning Technology Awards in the UK, and one of the category that I'm actually chair of judging is mobile learning. And an awful lot of organizations now are using chatbots in mobile learning for various different reasons. And, a couple of them, during the presentations when they were giving us demonstrations of what they were doing, and I was looking at the chat from the individuals and the responses from the chatbot, I was saying, my goodness, it really does. The way that the phraseology is, everything, it it would appear that you're actually talking to a person. And some of them were saying, oh, yeah, and we did it over Christmas time, and people were saying Happy Christmas to the bot.
Yeah, it's uncanny. And to tie in the neuroscience of that, the brain can't tell the difference. If you make it sufficiently realistic, we start to relate to that bot as though it were human, which is why people refer to their Alexa and their other the intelligences they might be using in their home as he or she. Siri. There was a movie about a guy falling in love with his Siri a couple of years ago, and then that was like way out science fiction, but already not anymore. There was a recent case of a child who formed such an attachment with Alexa, the parents became concerned because they caught him kind of playing games with Alexa. I mean, he couldn't tell the difference. So one of the challenges as learning professionals is we really haven't caught up to the technology in terms of what does this mean for us? How are we going to integrate it into our lives and into the workplace in a way that, I mean, it's already happening, as you say, Lesley. We need to be very careful how we do it so that these continue to be supportive learning technologies. And, it's easy for someone to get a little obsessed or led astray or creeped out or, the emotional baggage that might come from the implementation of some of these tools is something we haven't really thought out much yet because we don't have enough experience with it.
Well, it's interesting that Elon Musk...
Also the potential of scamming. Because so much disinformation out there. Yeah. Could you be led astray by thinking that, I mean, I know in some places banks are even starting to use them. So could you actually be led astray by giving your personal information to a chatbot when it's actually a hacker that's online?
Yeah, right. And, if people could be so influenced by simple text-based messages on Facebook during a presidential election, imagine how they might be influenced by a program that appears to be a human being live texting with them. There's a lot of ethical questions we need to think out. In the meantime,
research.
Say that again, Lesley?
No, I just said a lot more research, I think, needs to be done.
Well, I was just going to say that Elon Musk, who runs Tesla and SpaceX and other companies, he came out, I think it was earlier this year or late last year, saying one of the biggest things we have to fear in the future is AI. He really believes that in the wrong hands, it could really create a lot of havoc. And it's probably true. He who controls the code controls everything, I guess. And it can get scary because you don't know who's writing this stuff, why they're writing, is it ulterior purpose, subliminal messaging, blah, blah, blah. It can get ugly. So there's that dark side of it. But I mean, it's incredible what they're doing, but there's also that little bit of a dark side, which humans tend to have a real tendency to love to exploit. And it's just something you have to worry about a bit.
It is. And because there's that dark side, some people are trying to avoid it. They're a little, rather than the best defense is to get yourself more educated and to understand what the capabilities really are and what the limitations are and how you might be able to maintain control over an algorithm that is learning as it goes and making its own decisions. I find particularly people in learning and development are kind of pushing it aside and saying, well, I don't need to worry about that just yet. That's too far away. But it's not. It's here. It's already in the world and in the workplace. There was a college in Georgia that set up a chatbot as a student coach and ran for an entire semester, and the students all believed it was a human being. They thought it was a graduate student they were interacting with, and in fact, several of them nominated this graduate student for an award as the best teacher assistant. So that's an example of using AI in education that's very valid and really very productive. But we do have to ask ourselves how we are changing the way we relate to our computers as a result. So it is kind of an interesting discussion to have, and I don't think that should slow down the advances. We just need, be very careful along the way. But when Elon Musk hasn't been wrong about much, so when he says to be careful, I tend to agree with him on that.
Yeah, he's a pretty smart guy.
Do you think we need different skills, Margie? You look now, I remember when the internet started and you could, type in something to whatever search engine was around in these days and you'd get however many things back. And it took a bit of working out, but it wasn't that difficult to do. And nowadays, when we type in something into a search engine, we get, how many hundreds, thousands, millions of results. And the top ones are all ads. Do people realize that?
Not many people.
So maybe we should actually be, you're in education. Maybe we also should be looking at the new types of skills we should be developing in the wider context, but in learning and development, in senior management, on information skills.
Absolutely,
because information now is our knowledge.
I agree, and it's a matter of evaluating what you find on the internet. There are far too many people who just think, I saw it on the internet, it must be true, even with all the publicity that has been out there about, how that isn't true. There are so many people, for example, just the example, I was just thinking of it as you were speaking, I was going to say, yes, and the top page is all ads, and you said it. But how many people really know that? And how many people know if you're going to do a true meticulous search, you need to dig deeper than that. And you need to, have skills to go into advanced search where you can limit parameters and exclude ads and things like that. So there are a few good courses out there, and there's a few colleges doing good work with teaching their grad students and their college students, how to conduct an academic search online, because they used to just say you can't use online resources, but that isn't very realistic in today's world. However, you need to be able to evaluate and curate those resources just like you would, you're going to evaluate data in a magazine for entertainment much differently than data that's presented in a scientific journal. You have to do that same thing online. And it's a skill that I fear that we aren't teaching well enough at a young enough age, because that's where it really has to start. We're kind of adding it on to people who are adults or nearly adults. And so it will never be a core skill for them. It will always be something they have to remind themselves to do. What we really need to be focusing on, in addition to all those folks, is to make sure that at the early grades, from the minute you put a child on the internet, you are teaching them how to evaluate what they're seeing. And that seems to be lacking so far.
Yeah, and an awful lot of teaching, particularly on the internet, I mean, certainly from what I see, it comes from young people from very young ages, children, using the internet, tablets, iPhones, whatever, at home. And what instruction do they get? Because most of them are probably going to get instruction from their parents, but do their parents even know? I mean, the amount of times when people put things on Facebook and I then say, this is a scam, check Snopes, this is a scam, check that, and I put the link and they go, oh, I didn't even know that you could find out if it was rubbish.
Yeah, and it's funny, but it's also sad. And so there's another whole thing, we started by saying, what are you most interested in? What are you working on now? Another thing I'm working on is called Learning to Learn, is teaching people how their brain works, how technology works, and how they can use both to learn, and and developing that critical thinking, which is a skill that we more and more need in today's world that doesn't seem to fit into the normal curriculum, which is far more focused on technical things. So you can learn how to use a computer, how to use software, how to type code, but you don't necessarily learn how to evaluate the information that all those technical skills are giving you. And I think that's still a huge gap in our organization. So that's another project I'm working on for several of my clients. And they're finding that they get people from college who don't have these skills, and they have to teach that class.
Well, you bring up a good point, because right now critical thinking is not something that's emphasized in college and school at all. And so as a result, there's not a lot of quote-unquote critical thinking going on where people can decipher what's going on. They just accept it. It must be true. Like you said, if they read it, it must be true. And that's a little scary. Now, Margie, you sent us a PowerPoint, some slides. Is this a good time to talk about those?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to make sure we don't lose time. So
that's me. That's just me, so people know how to reach me.
The brain lady. I like it.
I love, that's my little prop that goes with me everywhere. That's a light up brain. That's life size. That's all the bigger it is. That's every thought you'll ever have, every memory, every breath you'll ever take. It's all in that wonderful organ. It is the most complex thing that we know of in the universe. It is more complex than the Milky Way.
And people are surprised when you tell them, did you know that the brain consumes 75% of the oxygen we intake? And they go, really? Why?
Really?
That's how much it needs to just keep going.
Oh, just to keep going. It is burning so much energy. And there's a light cell going on in your brain. Your brain cells are generating and sharing electrochemical energy all the time. It is really just a quivering mass of electrons. And so when we study the brain, what we're really studying is the flow of light through the brain and seeing what parts of it, as we say, light up. And that tells us something's going on in that tissue at that moment. So when you look at these beautiful pictures, and I think I might have some, this is a picture from a very powerful microscope. And these are brain cells. These are neurons. And you notice where the flashes of light are. If you look at the spaces, those long tendrils where they connect, they don't touch. They don't quite touch. And in between, there's a little gap called a synapse, and a signal is sent from one cell to another. That's that flash of light. And
they look like spiders.
Like what?
They do. Some people call them spiders.
Spiders. Yep.
Yeah. They're like,
if you think of that,
spiders.
Yeah. Now, each neuron is connected to about 30,000 other neurons through these tendrils. And they communicate on, at least that we've been able to identify so far, 13 different wavelengths of light. So so that's where the complexity comes in. If you start to do the math of all the different ways in which one neuron communicates to just one more neuron, it becomes substantial. And then you think about the fact that they're communicating to all these thousands of neurons at the same time. That's where the complexity of understanding the brain comes from. That's why it's taken us so long until we had advanced technology. And that's why the computing experts are so keen to mimic neural networks, because they're far more powerful than the way we typically traditionally have built computers. The brain is both digital and analog at the same time, and that's what's so wonderful about it. It just has a completely different structure than what we think of as a computer, which is very much very regimented, and the same order that helps a computer work also limits it. It slows it down, and it limits its amount of memory, and we're running up against that, which is why there's a lot of great work in neural networks. So that's part of what I was saying about how the two need each other in order to continue to advance.
Yeah, the picture is amazing, because you're really probably taking not even probably several millimeters inside the brain. It's really cool.
It is. There's something about it that's just so beautiful at the same time, even though, the main point is the science, but isn't there something wonderful about the fact that it is also so beautiful? And the idea, you know, we've always known, like when you say, hey, a light bulb went off in my head, we have always represented insight for an idea as a light bulb. We've always known. Somehow we understood our brain visually before we could put it into words. That's why we have metaphors like that. So we've always known that even before we.
Have you ever studied some of the? Oh, did you cut out? No,
no.
I think you're there. Sorry. Did you ever study the work of Dr. Amen? He's down in Southern California, and he's one of the top pioneers in brain imaging. And
yes.
Really
as a matter of fact, I've seen him speak.
Have you? Yeah, I've seen him on like PBS and stuff, but I've never seen him in person. He's pretty cool. Yeah. He was an Army colonel. He was he is a psychiatrist. And he says you can't really treat a patient with mental illness until you know what's firing inside the brain, what areas are active, what areas aren't, because the medication you prescribe, if any, have to work with those areas of the brain. Otherwise, you're just taking a shot in the dark. And he's poo-pooed by a lot of scientists because it's typical. They don't get it. And so therefore, no good. But it's really fascinating, the kind of research he's done, because I think he's way over 50,000 images. And like he says, for example, with ADHD, which is very prevalent in our society, he goes, there's not one type of ADHD, there's 7 types. And each type is treated differently, but most doctors treat it as, whoa, you're hyperactive. Yeah. And so it's interesting.
And most doctors do not do what he's done and do a brain scan of a live patient. But I'll tell you, he is winning converts. He is getting much more respect and acceptance now than I would say even 2 years ago.
That's good.
And as a matter of fact, the American Psychological Association, they have what some people call the brick. It's this huge, I don't know if I can get my hands on camera, a book that's like many, many inches thick that describes every psychological condition, what the symptoms are and what recommended treatments are. They completely revise that to be in alignment with discoveries from neuroscience. So they now recognize that psychological conditions can be related to something physical going on inside the brain. And for psychology, that was a major step forward. I think people with, and psychology is a very valid science, but it won't continue to be unless it continues to recognize that they are now working with brain scans, that is informing them. It's just like where astronomy was before the telescope. And then suddenly Galileo pointed one to the sky and said, hey, look at all the extra detail I can see. Well, that's what's going on in psychology right now. The brain scan is their telescope. It's changing their previous assumptions. And, you know, the wise ones are coming on board. And Dr. Amen was certainly one of the pioneers of that.
Yeah, it's fun watching.
I just hope through all of this that we also don't internalize too much, because I'm one of these probably horrible, boring people that I think that children also need to be outside and playing and doing things, and that adults too need to be, you know, outside enjoying our wonderful environment that we've got, and, you know, learning how to protect it and looking after it. And just in, you know, I've spent a lot of time in the States as well, and some of the countryside is so beautiful and so stunning that I just hope that we don't internalize too much and still enjoy our outside world, if that makes any sense, Margie. Not that I'm trying to take away from what you're saying.
Oh, no, and actually it ties in, because one of the things that happens when we study the brain is we realize that it needs fresh air, sunlight, exposure to nature. That, for example, taking a walk outside for even 5 minutes improves your cognition when you come back to the job or to class. So the more we learn about the brain, the more we learn how deeply it is connected with its outside world. As a matter of fact, your brain isn't just in your skull, it's in your entire body, it's in your fingertips, it's in, because it's connected to every part of your body And that is where the senses and being exposed to the outdoors comes in, is we're programmed to need that. You know, our brain is still functioning as though we are very, very primitive cave people out there surviving in a very dangerous world. And so stimuli from the outside is how we survive. If we don't get it, in fact, if you go into something like an isolation chamber, your brain will start to hallucinate. It will make up sensations because it misses them so much. So you are absolutely right. We all need it. And all that these recent studies have done is validate that and confirm that the ideal world is not behind four walls. It's outside. That's what the brain really needs.
Or sitting looking. You know, I went to London today, and I just spent time when I was in the carriage in the train looking round me, and the number of people that were just instead of looking out the window at the beautiful countryside, they were just on their phone all the time. Even when they were walking through the underground upstairs, and there was the people in the station were giving warning signs, were giving warning announcements saying there have been more and more accidents happening on the staircases in our stations. Can you please look where you're going? Can you please? And this was actually coming over the intercom as people were walking through the station. And I'm probably thinking, well, I'm not surprised, because all they were doing was looking at their phones.
Oh, I know. It is so sad. I was at, and I know we're getting off a little tangent, Rick, but bear with us. I was at the Louvre looking at the Mona Lisa, and I was the only one actually looking at the work of art. Everyone else was taking a selfie with their back turned
funny.
to the Mona Lisa so they could post that picture of them standing in front of the Mona Lisa. And I think that is terribly tragic. I wanted to scream, turn around. You know,
if you think about it, by looking at that picture, so to get back to your neuroscience and your learning, one of the things that they all say about the Mona Lisa is that if you walk around the room, her eyes follow you.
I did that.
And just think about the sensory benefit you're giving to your brain.
Yeah. And, you know, way before we had artificial intelligence, you know, Da Vinci figured out how to make us feel like that painting is alive. And that's an extraordinary achievement that needs to be experienced firsthand. And I tried it, and it's true. And people were probably wondering, why is that, you know, older woman walking around like that? Because nobody else was trying it, but it is very true. So if you were one of those people that has a selfie of yourself in front of something wonderful, go back and actually look at it. I strongly recommend it.
But I think that has a lot to do with neuroscience. But I think that's a lot to do with neuroscience and learning. What you're actually talking about, you know, that experience is actually about learning.
Absolutely. And here's the scary thing, is our brains are constantly rewiring, which is a wonderful thing. But that means that we are physically changing the human brain by our technology, and not always for the better. And so people are becoming predisposed to look at a screen because they do it so much. They are teaching their brain, that's where I'm supposed to focus, as opposed to I'm supposed to focus outward. And so the danger is that we might, as you fear, Lesley, over many generations, what it means to be human could change. And that's another thing that artificial intelligence is starting to introduce. It's the idea, it's what some people call the other AI. It's augmented intelligence. And Rick, you were joking about it, that now we use our devices to remind us what we used to know. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We have so much information we have to manage these days. If you rely on just your memory, you're going to get lost pretty quick in this world. So it's great to have access, quick access. That's what they're working on. So you can maybe have, like Google Glass, you have your computer, you can pull up a screen and look at it, or more invasive ideas, or maybe an implant in your head, starts to get a little scary. If it continues to be support, it might be very valuable, but it will certainly, no matter what those kind of advances do, they will physically change us. They will change what it means to be a human being. Now, that's happened through our whole history. So that's not, at some point in our history as a species, we developed opposable thumbs. And that turned out to be a real good thing. But we were different after that. So, it's okay that this is happening, but we need to be aware of it. We need to know it's happening and carefully monitor it, make sure it's changing in the way that we are comfortable with. So now that I've freaked all you out, that we're all going to walk around with
I totally agree with you. I think that there has balance in all things. So there is a balance to when you use your phone as a reminder, but actually, when you go into an exam, you do have to remember things. When you get on the bus, you do have to remember the stop you're meant to get off at.
Yeah. Yeah, or at least have, a note, or maybe you could have something on your screen that you keep staring at to remember. But you're right. There are things, and that's what your brain is so great at, is it's great at remembering. If we don't challenge it, you lose some of those. You get less good at remembering things and retrieving that information when you need it if you don't practice retrieving it. So one of the things that we teach people to do is kind of test themselves. In fact, it's one of the best ways to stave off dementia is to continue to challenge your brain to remember the stuff you learned in school and not to rely on Googling it and looking it up. There's a classic book that's pretty old now, but the data in there is still pretty valid, and is Google making us stupid? And it's not making us stupid, but it is changing the way we think, and it is maybe perhaps making us less inherently knowledgeable and more reliant on external sources, with all those problems of whether they are reliable sources or not that we discussed earlier.
And it's interesting because part of what happens with the internet, with reliance on computers or devices, is that our brains become lazy. Like you said, our connections aren't being made. And the more we do the same thing over and over and over again, the more our brains groove. And a groove is not a good thing, because you're basically etching a line inside the brain where it only connects through those connections and it ignores the other connections. And you wind up with addictive behavior, just a lot of issues, because the brain is stuck. It's stuck. And then you have brain tiredness, because if you keep shooting the same neurotransmitters over and over and over and over and over again, they don't have enough chemicals. They get worn out. It's like you said in the beginning, they burn out.
Yeah. And your brain looks for the path of least resistance. Part of it goes down to the level of quantum mechanics. That's what electrons do. The energy in the brain is a flow of electrons, and they're not conscious. So when I say they seek out a path of least resistance, it's not that they're doing it consciously, but it's just natural. Just like water flows downhill, electrons flow where it's easiest. And so it is hard to make a wise decision, to really research whether something you've just read is true or not, to think about the consequences of your actions. Those things are hard, and yet they're important as a society. We need people to do those things. And so if we don't continually reinforce those skills, that's where we end up with this kind of group think of a mishmash of every statement is equally valid. There's no such
Right.
thing as true
Yeah.
or false anymore. Now, I know I've probably raised, I kind of sound more like a prophecy of the apocalypse than a prophecy of positive. And so I want to make sure I emphasize that I'm a big believer that we are on the cusp of wonderful things, that if we harness the technology and the insights that we have available today and that we're going to continue to gain about how our brain works and developing ways to augment our own intelligence with intelligent machines that can become our partners in this world, I think that is a wonderful idea. So having a learning coach that is programmed and responds just to you and what you need and truly feels that way, going back to what we were talking about with chatbots, for example, I think that's a wonderful opportunities. But I can't overstress those positives without pointing out the dark side, as Lesley said, or the danger. And so, I want to make sure we don't leave with a message that all of this is to be feared. The deal is, as a learning professional, you need to harness it, and you have a responsibility to understand it and make wise decisions yourself. If you don't, they will be made by someone, and they may not be someone who is as altruistic as most learning professionals are. So most of us who are in this business, we're doing it because we really care about helping people learn. And if we keep that focus, we should make the right decisions. I have a lot of faith in that.
One of the presentations I was at that I was judging, they were talking, about chatbots, and they were talking about exactly what you've been talking about learning behaviors, and they were saying that one of the benefits that they've actually seen is that it was encouraging reflective behavior. It was encouraging, and I said, gosh, that takes me back to when I was a teacher. And one of the things when I was a teacher always was you had to be a reflective practitioner. So after you taught your class, one of the things you went to do as a lecturer, as a teacher, you went back and you thought about not just what lessons the young people had learned, but what you had learned from teaching them.
Right.
So you became a reflective practitioner. And I think that is something that AI can actually really help with in terms of coaching and that type of stuff. It can make you think about your own behaviors.
Right, and pose questions. That are ask the tough questions, the kind of questions a mentor or a really good coach would ask if you had the time to spend with them. Reflection is another key discovery, actually, that I teach in my brain-based learning workshops, because what we've learned is that, and actually this Thomas Dewey, way before we had computers, said, or at least way before we used them in the ways we do today, said there was no learning until there was reflection upon experience. And that is so very true. And all that neuroscience has done is validate that just being present while something happened doesn't mean you learned anything. It's only after you internalize it, go back over the experience and connect the dots, so to speak, quite literally connect the neurons, that you create meaning out of it and decide whether you're going to learn from it or not. So that means keeping a journal, or at least taking a beat and thinking about, what have I learned? If you don't do that, you just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So that is one of the perfect applications of a chatbot. It's not just you missed this, but what will you do differently next time? That's the question that you can build into, for example, your e-learning or your self-paced training of any kind.
How do we get out of Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great example, because at first he doesn't learn, does he?
No.
He just keeps first of all, he just keeps repeating and repeating the mistakes, and then he tries to manipulate the world into what he wants. And then finally a light bulb goes off in his head, and he figures out what he really needs to do is change as a person. And that's where the reflection comes in. That's where the growth comes in. Thank you for that. That's a great example. One of my favorite movies, too.
It was good. It was good. Well, we are just about out of time. How should someone get a hold of you if they want to learn more about your workshops and the work you do?
Yeah, well, you can write me, Margie, at learningtogo.info, or my site is learningtogo.info, and you can find me on Twitter at Margie Meacham.
Great. And we'll have it all in the show notes. So if you need to get a hold of Margie or want to get a hold of Margie, you'll be able to get a hold of her. And Margie, as always, it's a pleasure seeing you and talking and chatting. And are you doing any presentations soon? Any shows where people can meet you?
I am doing some private workshops for some really wonderful companies, so that won't help you very much. And my 2019 speaking calendar isn't set yet. I've proposed to several big ones. One of the things, the Chatbot workshop, I'm doing with my dear friend Joe Gansey,
Joe.
eLearning Joe. Guys might know Joe?
Yep.
So,
I know Joe.
we are really hoping that we can announce several appearances of that workshop soon. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got Joe coming out here in 2 weeks. He's going to be with us doing a show, having lunch, and just hanging out. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Well,
maybe by then you'll have our date.
That'll be great. And because we're going to try to have him do a live show with us, since we've always done shows with him. I know Joe personally, but it'd be nice to have him do a live show in studio with us. So we're going to try to do that and have a good time.
Okay. I'll be watching.
Are you sending me lunch? Are you sending me lunch then, Rick?
I need to send you a light right now. And I need to also buy one of your capsules. So I haven't forgotten that either.
Yeah, you'll have to look that one up,
yes,
Margie.
I know how to do that one. I've seen the website.
What Learn Appeal do.
Yep.
Yeah, you'll have to look, Margie. It's Learn Appeal, www.learnappeal.com.
I will look.
It's a very cool project what they're doing. Well, anyway,
what we're doing is we're taking e-learning to people offline.
Oh,
no internet.
And we're talking people with no access to a lot of internet.
Yeah. You know, that's actually how it all started was, back in the day, it was all on discs. Yeah. Going old school on us, Lesley. All right.
This is all done with very high tech that we can even offline, we can get 200 connected learners at once.
Wow.
Only using Wi-Fi.
Great. Yeah. That sounds like a wonderful idea.
Yeah. And it's a charity that we're doing it. It's we're helping the disconnected and disadvantaged.
Okay.
That would be about anybody in a big city.
Well, and I can think of a lot of third world and very rural areas. Yeah, where that would be important. Yeah.
Well, I think the first capsules went into Africa, right?
Yeah, Kenya. And we're actually also now having interest from schools in the UK that are maybe in deprived areas where the parents simply at home simply can't afford internet for their youngsters. They just can't afford it. Right. We us who have make assumptions about those that don't.
Yeah, we assume it's a necessity, and it's not affordable for everyone. I would think a school that might also be very interested in it for the security of it, because now you don't have to expose the kids to the internet.
It's not on the internet, so it's totally safe and totally secure.
Yeah.
So and that's another reason that schools are now starting to get interested.
Yeah,
and we also want to encourage young people who are at school, maybe the 15, 16-year-olds now, to even think about careers in learning technology, because they don't even know these careers exist.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I will definitely get back with you, Lesley. I'd like to learn more about that. Maybe there's some way I can help.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'm sure you can have a look at the website, but I'm sure you'd be interested.
Go back about 3 or 4 shows. I think we talked about it. We had a special with Lesley and one of our collaborators on the project, so it was fun.
Right.
Well, anyway, thanks again for coming on, Lesley, as always.
Yeah, lovely to actually meet you this time, Margie, as opposed to just tweeting.
Yes. Yeah. So we're going to practice what we preach. We're not going to be just screen connections anymore. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And with that, we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.